BYU spring practice has finally come to an end. 5 weeks have flown by, Dave, and by all accounts, players and coaches have been pretty pleased with what they saw.
It's the 30-year anniversary of the 1984 championship. I'm calling it right now. National. No, I can't even say it. I can't even say it in jest. No, I mean it's spring ball. It's always really bright. It's exciting. Especially when you have the same players coming back in key positions. You've got the quarterback coming back. You got the running back. You got some of the stud linebackers. A lot of the core of the team is back, and I think that's probably what leads itself to so much optimism this year. And I think it's probably a fair optimism to have, is when you're bringing back such dynamic players like Taysom and Jamal, how can you not be optimistic?
Well, one of the things that everybody's really talked about since the beginning of spring practice started was the fact that the go fast, go hard thing, it's not as intense anymore because they did all that stuff last year. They've gone through a season with that type of tempo, so they didn't have to spend a ton of time on that this year, focusing on tempo and implementing that new type of system. They already had it down, and so they could focus on other things, and I really think that's paid huge dividends for them over the last 5 weeks.
It's not very often that you hear Robert and I get really excited or animated or say a lot of positive things, but he actually compares last year's group with this year's group, and he likes so much of where they are that they don't have to implement the system like you were saying, that they can just say, you know what, we're going to refine this. And part of that process is because sophomore Taysom Hill and sophomore Jamal Williams, I mean, they were young players that he now has as juniors, and now they're going to have them as seniors most likely. I mean, these are kind of players that you can really build a program around. Young guys that know nothing else. That all they know is this system now, and that's going to just really pay off dividends over the next couple of years. And that is exactly what they needed. Last year was kind of the year that they had to take their lumps. They had a very difficult schedule. It was a time to maybe learn and develop some players, a lot like what the Jazz are trying to do. But they had a successful season last year because they had some success with these young guys. And I think it's just going to bear out, positively for this team this year. And then as seniors, they could have a really spectacular year.
Well, anytime we're talking about BYU, we obviously focus on the quarterback, and you've talked a lot about Taysom Hill. And I think the quote from Robert and I today was, Taysom has a lot on his plate, and he's handled it beautifully. I mean, not only is he the starting quarterback for BYU, and so much of the offense is predicated on what he does, whether it be with his legs or with his arm. Speaking of the arm, he's trying to get that accuracy a lot better. Oh, and on top of all that, he's getting married really soon. So, the coaches were praising him with
a student athlete.
And he's a student athlete. Coaches were praising him with how he's handling all of this. And quite frankly, that doesn't surprise me one bit. That's just Taysom Hill.
He's shown the leadership from a very young age. So the fact that he's just handling everything in stride, it really doesn't surprise anybody, I don't think. You look at him, and he is the unquestioned leader. And he was the unquestioned leader last year as a sophomore, trying to put forth this new offense and this new go fast, go hard mantra that they have, and he's just taken it. I don't know if anyone's moved in as seamlessly into a leadership role as Taysom has. Max Hall did a really nice job as a sophomore, but my goodness, that's a lot of pressure to put on a very young player that's still learning how to play. But again, I look at it as he played the 13 games last year. Now, was it 13?
13, and then he had the 13. two starts in the previous
season. And the 2 starts before. You're looking at a 15-game starter coming into your junior year. This guy is not surprised by a lot of things that are happening. And Bronco talked about it. He said, you know what, he's recognizing blitz. He's recognizing coverages. He's going through his progressions at a natural pace. He's not trying to rush through it. He's allowing the receivers to develop in their routes, and that is going to do nothing but take a lot of the pressure off his legs to have to try to run for the first down all the time, where he can actually say, you know what, I'm going to sit in the pocket, refine my passing skills. They talked about goals that they had this year, 65% pass completion, and then converting on 45% of their third downs, and they were way above, they said, way above on both those counts. You remember, Taysom threw under 55% last year. Can you imagine if he completed another 10% of those passes. I mean, that's about 5 more passes a game. That's going to be spectacular.
And see, that's what I think. We talk about how the accuracy needs to improve, and he knows that.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about it having to improve significantly. I mean, he's not that far off from where the coaches, and quite frankly, where he wants to be as well. So it shouldn't take that much more to get him into that 65%, for the game. So I really think, and the coaches talked about it, Bronco mentioned it, and Robert and I mentioned it, Taysom mentioned it as well. All those goals you talked about, they've reached those. They felt they've done a really good job of that during spring. The other thing that Bronco talked about, he was kind of singling out some guys, and this is from a position that has had a lot of turnover from last year to this year. I'm talking about the wide receivers.
Right.
He specifically mentioned the JC transfer, Nick Kurtz, who, he said, speaking of having a lot on their plate, he's learning, to go from one level to this level of college football, and he was really pleased with how he progressed. And he also mentioned Taron Houck, a guy that, has kind of been asked to play receiver and then gain some more weight and then go play tight end and then come back to receiver. He mentioned Taron as a guy that's really stepped up and was really pleased to see him. That's got to be good to hear if you're a BYU fan, because with so much turnover, to be able to see these guys come in and seem to acclimate themselves quite quickly, that's got to make you feel pretty good.
And we really saw last year that depth is what hurt this team more than anything. When a few guys went down, when Mitch Matthews went down to the receiver position, these guys really struggled in depth, and that's what they're trying to replenish. They have some really skilled frontline guys, but when they go out, when you're running as many plays as they are, you've got to be able to bring in waves of people. I mean, they averaged 85 plays last year per game. I mean, it was an outrageous offensive pace. So you almost need a team and a half of starter quality players if you're going to play with that kind of pace, and that's what Bronco has been most maybe encouraged about, is the depth that he's starting to see from all positions. The only position that he really feels like they're a little thin is middle linebacking, the middle linebacker position, which is understandable. They've lost 3 studs over the last 2 years, and Manoa Pakula is kind of the guy that's going to have to come in and step in, and Zach Stout, who's returning from all sorts of excitement over last year, seems to have the position kind of locked up so far. So it's going to be interesting to see how that depth at the middle linebacking position kind of plays out.
Well, one place they're definitely not thin, especially when it comes to talent, is secondary. And Bronco talked about Trenton Trammell, who we know was hurt in practice number 1 last year and missed the entire season. Now he's back and has really turned the heads of the coaches, and that's got to be a really good sign, because you're talking about getting Jordan Johnson back, and you have Trenton Trammell. Craig Bills is going to be there. Rob Daniel is probably going to is kind of doing that cross training to where they can do some safety. Dallin Levitt is a guy that Bronco talked about that can kind of go in between those positions. They should be really stacked. I don't remember a BYU secondary with this much talent and with this much depth.
Well, and we haven't been able to observe a lot of them, and even in the spring game, we saw Trenton Trammell get burned on the big 57-yard Taron Houck touchdown. So I mean, they're talented. We didn't see any of Jordan Johnson. He's still recovering from the ACL. So I mean, there's guys that are talking up. I haven't necessarily seen it. I haven't seen that these guys have played out of their mind, because I just haven't been able to observe that much. They close a lot of practices, so but the way they talk about them, it's as optimistic as I've ever heard them talk about that position, because it's the only thing. Otherwise, you keep Michael Davis on that side of the ball. Michael Davis, who came in as a wide receiver and then played big plays.
And Bronco, by the way, called him, I believe he said, I'm trying to think of the exact quote, under the radar is what he called Michael at wide receiver. But you're right. I mean, last year they had a lot of guys, and unfortunately it was for the wrong circumstances because of injury. The good thing is, though, they got a lot of guys in that saw some time. That can only help BYU.
Well, and that's kind of the question is are they able to move a great athlete like Michael Davis back to the offense because they feel so confident? Well, that's exactly what they think. They think they've been able to do is say, you know what, even though we have a ton of wide receivers coming in to try to replace Cody Hoffman, I think Michael Davis could be one of those great receivers. So we're going to pull him away from learning probably a good half of the season at defensive back, and say, you know what, we like the guys that we have. You've got Jordan Johnson, obviously, a senior with a ton of experience. Trent Trammell is probably going to be the other starter. But then you're rotating in Sky Povey and Dylan Levitt. You've got Craig Bills at the safety position. A lot of these guys are going to be kind of sharing these roles. They're going to be playing a lot of nickel and rotating in and out at the safety position. So on paper, they look as deep as they've ever been. It'll be interesting to see what happens early on and in fall camp after a good summer workout.
Well, now the coaches will take a back seat, and the players will really take over for the next couple of months. The players, the leadership committee will kind of run practices and get the guys handled during the off season, and then everybody will get back together. It's not too far, Dave, and we're going to have fall camp, which will roll around in August. For Dave Noriega, I'm Jason Shepard for Sports Beat.